Welcome! If you're new here, my name is Melissa, but if you are one of my close personal subscribers and you've been following along, then you already know that you can call me Missy. In today's video, we are going to be continuing to make over my bedroom, which is a very slow process. It started out with me making over my closet doors. If you're interested in that video, I'll go ahead and link it here. Today, we are continuing with my closet, but I promise it is going to be as whimsical as fart bubbles. I know that I am not the only one who has dreamed of having a home with secret passageways and secret drawers, just secrets everywhere inside the house. Preferably not the kind that get you haunted. So this project is going to include some secret drawers that I can use to just put some jewelry in. That way, if anyone comes to rob me, then they won't be able to find my precious jewelry. Not that any of it's actually that precious. So I need to get out of my studio in order for me to get to work. All right, allow me to introduce you to what we're working with. All of the supplies that I purchased before summer even had aspirations to being hot. Why, you may ask, if I have had all of these supplies for that long, have I not yet done anything with them? And I'll tell you, it's because of insecurities. I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if I can get this done in a week. But today, we are going to prove that I can do this thing. I don't know if it's gonna turn out the way I want it to. I don't know if it's gonna be good, but we're gonna do it. So, at long last, let's get to work. All right, this is what we're working at. Here is our before shot. Hopefully it looks better in a few days. I invite you here to take a peek into my brain, and by brain I mean sketchbook, because that's where I drew out what was inside my brain. Drawing out my ideas is a little bit like having a conversation with myself where I'm able to work out the details of what I kind of conceptually want. So here you can see where I thought I would be able to put in a hidden drawer, and I had to figure out how that would be nestled in with all of the layers of things. First thing I need to do is try and figure out some measurements so that I can start cutting out my pieces. The length, trying to figure out how I'm gonna split this up. I've got at least 14 inches in between these top studs. Eventually, I figured out how to evenly divide the space so that I could fit drawers of equal size in between unevenly spaced studs. I then took my measurements outside and began cutting. This board would become the windowsill countertop thingy, and I had to cut it a few times because I am but a mortal. But I did eventually get it to fit into my space and moved on to cutting little bits of wood which would serve to raise that countertop to sit evenly with where. And after initially cutting those, I realized that they were just a smidge too long to fit in that space, so I ended up having to cut them down lengthwise as well. I finally got this to fit. Here you can see that it's being held up by these. This one, if I have the supports, you can see it sits a little high up. So I'm gonna leave that one out. You can also see the board is in fact a bit warped,
But I think that once I get these bits attached and then this attached to these, that will help to straighten it out, at least to the extent that it becomes usable as a surface. This will bring my wood even with the windowsill, and then I will be able to fill in the gaps with some caulk. But my idea is to make some hidden shelving. So next I'm gonna cut this drywall off. It's day 2 time, and I need to show you what I've done. I needed to put away my miter saw, so real quick before I did that, I just cut down some thin plywood so that they can fit here and form places where the drawers will sit. They're still too wide, like they're sticking out. So they still need to be cut this way, but I'm going to pull out my table saw to do that part of it. I also cut each of these to size. And then this morning I went to Home Depot. I had purchased these along with all of these other supplies, and since it's been a few months, I lost them. If all of these other supplies weren't large, I probably would have lost them too. Here these are, and they're just spring latches. I also got some Dremel pieces, and I bought a really small router bit that I'm going to use when I make the little drawers. I think that's all of my updates. Let's get working.
I glued the spacers together in pairs and then clamped them down, and after clamping them down originally, I realized that they needed a clamp on either end in order to really get a nice tight fit of the pieces together, but I didn't have enough clamps to do that, so I had to unclamp everything and then reclamp them, and I just did them all together all at once. Problem solved, but the clock is always ticking, so I moved on to the next step while those dried. I needed to install those vertical trim pieces, which meant that I had to make sure that everything was measured out accurately, and I used the level to make sure that they were running straight up and down. Then with a little caulk and my penciled in guidelines, I used my brad nailer to go ahead and stick those right up on the wall. The next little problem I had to solve was the fact that this little piece of wood was a little bit crooked, so I just used that oscillating saw to shave off a little bit of it so that my insert pieces would fit. And speaking of those insert pieces, I needed to trim those down, so I pulled out my table saw and went ahead and took care of that, while being very careful not to cut off any fingers. The next job for my table saw was to cut out some MDF. This was going to be used to do some of that decorative arch trim that would go underneath my secret drawers. Speaking of the secret drawers, the walls of those drawers were also going to be made out of this MDF, so I cut out the strips for that while I was at this as well. Then, off camera, I pulled out my router and realized that the expensive little router bit I purchased would be too small, so I ended up using an old one that I already had, and I put channels in the drawer walls that the drawer bottoms could slide into, and here you can see me cutting out said drawer bottoms.
I've got these drawers more or less ready to be assembled. I shortened the back piece so that it can slide under this lip of drywall. I still need to cut a little notch into those. They're kind of shorter than they need to be, which means there's fewer points of attachment for these edge pieces so that they can fit together. But there's not much I can do about that now.
At this point, I was a little sick of pulling out and putting away power tools, so I thought that I would cut just the little notches in the drawers by hand before going ahead and starting on the assembly process. Some glue and my little brad nailer would be plenty in order to put these together because they would just be small, little, lightweight drawers.
Another day which promises to see me covered in sawdust. I need to do a few things. I need to cut the trim. I need to get my fancy pants design transferred onto these, and then I need to cut those out, and then I need to do the small amounts of carving. I'm gonna try and make it easy on myself, but I'm not very good at that. But I do need to draw my design out onto some paper so that I can use that to then transfer it onto this wood. Are already cut to fit nicely in between. So I just need to finalize the dimensions. I've got 2 of these boards. So if I do 4, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 would be, I would need to cut it a little bit more to fit on these end pieces. If I don't do these like absolute corner bits, that would be fine because they get covered mostly anyways by stuff being in the closet. That's that. Let's get to work.
I knew when I began this project that the most time-consuming part would be the aforementioned fancy pants trim that I was setting out to carve. And before I could get to carving, I needed to take that sketch that I showed you at the beginning of this video and scale it to fit in the space that I needed it to fit in. Plus, I needed to turn that into a template so that I could make 4 of exactly the same design, or near enough, given the fact that I am a human being with human hands making a human project. That makes it sound faintly cannibalistic. Like as if I'm making a book bound in human flesh or something, which is absolutely obviously not what is going on in this video. But now I fear that I've strayed a bit too far, so let's get back on track. After drawing my design out, I knew exactly what dimensions I would need for my trim, so I started by cutting the molding that would make the drawer fronts, and then finished cutting my MDF down to size.
When my battery died earlier, I was working on transferring this pattern onto my wood blocks. I did finish it since then. What I did was I took some charcoal. I chose a harder charcoal so that it wouldn't just get all over the entire thing. And I covered part of my paper with it. So I took this, laid it down charcoal side. Then I took this and laid it down on top of that. I started out using a pencil, but I realized that I had this scoring implement that is part of my Cricut machine, and I thought that would be a good thing to use, so I went ahead and scored all along my lines, which pushed this down onto my wood, thus leaving my design onto the wood. Now what I'm doing is using a bunch of carving tools to begin to carve into this wood. I did try using my Dremel, And while it did work, this wood is kind of soft. It's a little bit papery, and I'm not sure I trust my precision with the Dremel in order to cut into this. So I think it'll be best for me to use my archaic chisels, which is going to be time consuming. Hopefully it won't take too long to get it done. But because it's gonna take so long, I really need to get working on it.
And so I began. I started out with the broader chisel and I used the mallet to help dig it in. But when I was using the smaller chisel, I didn't have to use the mallet as much because there was less surface area for me to push in. And as I said, it's quite a soft material. So I only really needed to use the mallet when I really wanted to get in deep. Other than that, I enjoyed the control that I had when I was just pushing my chisels into the material by hand.
Here's what I have done on this piece. It looks okay, especially from a distance, but up close, it's pretty messy, which isn't my favorite. And it took a long time, which I expected, but also I need to be better at time management, and I have 3 more of these to do, at least 2 more, and this one's not even completely done, and it's kind of messy. And so now I'm wondering if it would be worth cutting it out. So from the beginning, my idea was going to be to just cut out these deeper gouges. Because one of the problems is that this is tough and sturdy all together, but the smaller the pieces are, the more brittle and breakable it is. This is basically cardboard. So if I did cut out pieces, that compromises the structural integrity, which is why I thought I'll just have to carve it. I think I'm just gonna keep going with the carving, and we'll see where that takes us. All right, this took forever, but after I cut it out, I realized since this is the thinnest part and it actually feels sturdy enough, I can probably cut out these large recesses instead of carving them out, which I think will save a lot of time, and is what I did on this one. So I'm just gonna need to carve in the details for the leaves and a few other things, but it's looking good. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out the other 2, and then I can finish the carving, and hopefully this will be done tomorrow.
In order to cut away the negative space, I needed to first drill holes into each of those segments that I would be cutting away so that I could fit my jigsaw blade into those spaces. I then gathered everything up and took it outside, which seems a little bit silly. The purpose of taking it outside is to not just get sawdust all into the air. But if you look at my studio, it is already covered in minuscule MDF shavings. But there is a difference between sawdust made by a power saw and the processes that I was using in the studio. With a power saw, the sawdust tends to get much more up in the air. So I stand by my decision to take it outside for this step. All done with the jigsaw, and back inside, the jigsaw had not completely eliminated the need for carving. I just needed to create more dimension in places and differentiate between where the viney sections are and where the border sections are. So there was still plenty of work to be done. Even so, this absolutely cut down the amount of time that I needed to spend with carving this thing. Additionally, it gave the carvings a bit more depth that was really difficult to achieve just by gouging out material.
It is the final day. There is an autumnal chill to the air, thus the sweater. If all goes well today, then by the end of it, we will have some secret drawers and a pretty little decorative element to my closet space. So let's get working.
I was able to complete a good amount of my carving the night before, but there was still some more carving to be done. So I went ahead and got to work on that. When I was done with that, I decided that I would want to seal up the MDF because, as I said before, it kind of is like really thick cardboard, like cardstock, just super, super thick. And especially where I had carved away, it had become very porous. I happened to have a gallon of clear Elmer's glue, so I mixed that with a little water and used it to go ahead and seal up my MDF. I then decided that it would be easier to paint the trim before applying it to the wall because of the irregular shapes and also the deeper crevices in the pieces. So I went ahead and painted that as well. The yogurt cup of paint that you saw me hold up to the camera was actually leftover paint from when I made over this studio space that you see me working in. And I just saved that paint with a little plastic wrap on top and have been hoarding it since I did that project, which was about a year ago. I wanted my green here to be a bit lighter, thus the lighter paint can that you can see as well. While I waited for paint to dry, I could not just rest. I needed to continue with the project, and I put some trim onto the drawers, which will help to hide the fact that they are actually drawers and not just part of the trim. Next, because I am but a simpleton, I was ready to use my simple solution for making the drawers pop out when I needed them, which is, of course, these spring latches. But here I ran into more problems because of my lack of foresight. It turns out the strike plate poked up too high when I put it here against the front of the drawer, so I used my Dremel to cut a little notch in.
Hello, and welcome to the last day of this project. I know I said yesterday was the last day of this project, but surprise, I still don't know how long things take to do. But today I only have a few things to do. I'm nervous about those things, so we should just get into them before I start to feel really chickeny. One of the things I need to do today is cut this down to size. And while I have the saw out, I've determined that I need to create a little strip of wood to go in here so that I can put this on the inside. Because if I put it here, then there's not enough space under the drawer for this thing to sit when it's closed. So it needs to be here. I need at least a little strip to just go up above here so that this doesn't wobble. From there, it's all just installation and then painting everything to match. But that's it, and I'm thinking it's not gonna take too long. I've been wrong before, so let's get into it.
At this point, my checklist of things to do was getting shorter, but my brain was getting more scattered. So there was a lot of running back and forth to collect the supplies I needed for this next part.
Finally getting it all together. Normally, with screws this small, I wouldn't bother with drilling a pilot hole, but I don't want to take any chances. I'm gonna go ahead and attach these strike plates.
I kind of just eyeballed the center of this because it wasn't as important to get the strike plate in a perfect position. It would be more important to get my little spring latch in the correct position. So it was fairly quick and easy getting these little guys installed.
This line is where the trim is, and the line in between is approximately where I want the drawer to sit.
So this was the tricky part, and I decided to use some masking tape to tape my spring latch onto the wood approximately where I needed it to go, and then I put that wood back in the room and tested it out just to see if it would work, marked out where it all needed to go, and then I was able to install each of those little spring latches, and this ended up working quite well and was honestly a lot less scary than I had initially thought that it would be. I did find, however, that as I was testing it out, the drawers had so much wiggle to them that the latch mechanism worked, but it didn't work as well as it could have. So at the last second, I decided that I would actually, in fact, use this bit of angle metal that I had actually bought for this purpose to make some little guide rails for my drawers. I think that the metal is just aluminum. It was fairly soft, so I was able to just use my drill bits with it in order to make the holes that I would need for the screws that would hold the railing pieces in place. They didn't end up being as snug around the drawers as I would have liked, but I would rather have them be not snug enough than way too snug. And with that done, it was finally time to put it all together.
We are at the final stage of this project, which is painting. I decided that I was going to paint all this wood, which means I should probably, there we go. So yeah, gonna get into it.
Do I have larger paint brushes in order to accomplish this? I do. I didn't feel like getting them, and honestly, I was kind of just enjoying the process of painting with a smaller brush. Not included in this painting montage is that I added a little bit of a darker wash in order to bring out some of the details in those carved pieces, and we are ready to move into the reveal.
That's it. I'm so happy with how this turned out. This beautiful trim is not perfect, but honestly, I love it all the more. I would rather have this imperfect, gorgeous hand-designed trim than some generic piece that I could have gotten at the hardware store. There's just so much character and beauty to doing something like that yourself. I love it so much that I decided to rearrange my closet a little bit, and these shelves had previously been where these coats are. I'm not sure that it's the most efficient use of space, but it does make this little drawer more accessible. Everything might end up going back to the way it was, but I just thought I'd try it out just to make the space a little bit more visible, a little bit more accessible. I always start one of these home improvement projects feeling more insecure than any of my other projects, and I always end it feeling so emboldened to start the next one. They just tend to be the most expensive projects to do because building materials, wood, all of those things are just pricey. But I absolutely love it so much. And I've always wanted little secret hiding spots. There's just something so whimsical about that. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. If you liked anything about this video, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you would like to see more videos like this, or some of my sewing videos or my art videos, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're looking for another way to support this content, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Anything will do. And if you can't think of something to say, go ahead and put an emoji that represents construction work, and then I'll see you in the next video. Bye.